My name is Alina Morales, and if you had asked me a few years ago what my dream wedding would look like, I would have painted a picture of a grand ballroom, a string quartet, crystal chandeliers sparkling above, and my entire family smiling proudly at me. But life rarely unfolds the way we imagine, and sometimes it twists into something darker, more painful, and strangely more satisfying in the end. I grew up in a family that on the surface seemed close-knit. My parents, Jorge and Camila, built a life rooted in tradition, appearances, and the constant need to outshine others. My older sister Valeria was always the golden child, smart, beautiful, and effortlessly adored by relatives. My younger brother Mateo was the carefree jokester who could do no wrong. And then there was me, the middle daughter, the one who was never enough. If Valeria brought home straight A's, my B+ was met with, "Why can't you be more like her?" If Mateo cracked a joke at the dinner table, everyone laughed. But if I tried, my father would just frown and say, "Alina, stop trying so hard." From childhood, I felt like an afterthought. My parents never missed Valeria's recitals or Mateo's soccer games, but when I begged them to come to my debate competitions, they always had something more important. I learned to swallow the hurt and carry on quietly, but deep down it carved into me like an invisible scar. By the time I met Daniel, the man who would become my fiancé, I was already conditioned to expect disappointment. Daniel was kind, attentive, and genuinely loved me for who I was. He wasn't from a wealthy family, nor did he flaunt material things. But his heart was good, and that meant more to me than anything. Unfortunately, to my parents, especially my mother Daniel, wasn't impressive enough. "You're sure about him, Alina?" My mother asked one night, her lips pursed as though she had tasted something sour. "I mean, he's a school teacher." "Not exactly." "Ambitious." "He makes me happy, Mama," I replied quietly. She sighed, shaking her head. "Love doesn't pay the bills or raise your status." Her words stung, but I was used to it. My parents valued appearances above everything. And though Daniel wasn't flashy, he was the one person who made me feel seen. So when he proposed to me after 2 years of dating, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The real trouble began when wedding planning entered the conversation. Valeria had gotten married 2 years earlier in a lavish ceremony at a 5-star hotel downtown. It had been the event of the season, with hundreds of guests, designer gowns, and every detail dripping with luxury. My parents had spared no expense for her, proudly showing off to family friends. But when it came to me, things were different. One evening, I sat with my parents at the dinner table, nervously clutching my planning notebook. "Daniel and I found a venue we really like," I began. "Where?" my father asked, barely looking up from his phone. "It's this beautiful countryside lodge about 40 minutes outside the city. It's rustic but elegant, lots of greenery, a lake nearby." My mother's scoff cut me off. "A lodge? Alina, are you serious? People will think we couldn't afford better. Valeria's wedding was at the Ritz-Carlton, and you want to marry at some cabin?" "It's not a cabin," I protested, my voice trembling. "It's charming and intimate, and it fits our budget." Valeria smirked from across the table, swirling her wine. "Honestly, Alina, it sounds cheap. Don't you want your wedding to be memorable?" "It will be memorable," I snapped before softening. "Because it's about Daniel and me, not the venue." But they didn't see it that way. From that moment, my family mocked every detail of my plans. When I mentioned I wanted wildflowers instead of roses, my mother sneered. When I said we'd serve homemade-style dishes instead of a 5-course meal, my father muttered, "Embarrassing." Even Mateo, who I thought might support me, laughed. "At least hire a DJ, Alina. Don't tell me you'll just play music off a speaker." Each jab felt like another needle poking at my fragile excitement. Inside, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. I wanted to stand firm and defend the choices Daniel and I were making together. But years of conditioning made me crave their approval, even when I knew I'd never get it. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "Why isn't my happiness enough for them?" Daniel noticed my turmoil. One night, he pulled me into his arms and said, "Alina, this is our day, not theirs. You've spent your whole life trying to please people who don't see you. Let this be the moment you choose yourself." His words gave me courage, but the weight of my family's disapproval never fully left me. When the invitations went out, the whispers among relatives began. My Aunt Lucia called me, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mi amor, I heard your wedding is at some countryside place? Don't you think that's a little low class?" I bit my tongue to keep from crying. "It's what Daniel and I want," I said firmly, though my voice cracked. By the time the wedding drew near, the gossip had spread. Family friends compared my venue to Valeria's grand celebration, and I knew people were expecting a disappointment. Their judgment loomed over me like a storm cloud, threatening to ruin the one day I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. But what they didn't know, what they could never have anticipated, was the guest list. Daniel and I had quietly planned something that would shock them all. Something that would shift the balance of power in my family forever. And though I didn't realize it at the time, their mockery was about to set the stage for the sweetest vindication of my life. The morning of the wedding broke like a held breath finally exhaled soft light over the countryside. A low hush on the lake, the gentle creak of pines as a breeze combed through them. I woke before my alarm, the lodge's old floorboards murmuring under my bare feet as I padded to the window. Mist lifted off the water like a veil, and for a moment I let myself believe that the day would hold me kindly. Today, I whispered to my reflection, palms pressed to the cool glass. Today, I choose myself. In the hallway outside my room, I heard the scuffle of garment bags and a voice I knew too well riding on a laugh. Valeria. Already rehearsing how the day would be about her. I closed my eyes, gathered the threads of my nerve, and went to meet everyone in the small dining room where breakfast had been laid out, fresh fruit, warm pastries, coffee that smelled like cinnamon. "Buenos dias," I said, forcing brightness. My mother turned, looked me up and down in my silk robe, and smiled tightly. "You should eat, Alina. Big day." She didn't hug me. She kissed the air somewhere near my cheek, then drifted away, fingertips skimming the backs of antique chairs as though she were cataloging all the ways the lodge wasn't the Ritz. Valeria sat at the head of the farmhouse table in a white blazer white crossing, her legs like a judge perched on a bench. Mateo waved at me with jam on his thumb. "Hey sis, don't stress. It's your day," he said, as if that meant anything in our family. I poured coffee. My hands weren't shaking yet. I'd promised myself I'd let their comments slide off me like rain off a leaf. I would be calm. I would keep my heart with Daniel, who was at another cabin with his best man, getting ready to meet me at the clearing by the lake we'd chosen for our vows. "Did you see the parking situation?" Valeria asked the room. Gravel. My heels sunk in. I almost fell. "Imagine," my mother said, slicing a croissant with a knife as if it were a tiny insult that needed dissection. "Guests arriving in evening wear to a forest." "It's a lodge," I said. "There's a paved lot just beyond the pines. The coordinator has people guiding." I saw one person my father interrupted without looking up from his email. A kid in a vest. "If you needed money for proper staff, Alina, you could have said something." "We're fine," I said, and I heard the wobble under my voice like a plate rattling in a cupboard. "You know, people will compare," Valeria murmured, stirring her coffee. "Not that it's a competition, but people remember the standard. My wedding just set a tone." "Your wedding was 200 people in a ballroom," I said, "with hydrangeas flown in from Holland and a champagne fountain." "Exactly," my mother said, as if I had just admitted to a crime. I stared at the napkin in my lap and willed myself to be a stone. In my chest, a small wild bird threw itself against the bars of its cage. Run, run, but. I closed the door on that sound. We had chosen this venue because it felt like us. Because the wooden beams caught the light like honey and the dock curved into the lake like an outstretched hand. And because out here I could breathe. "Where's Daniel?" Mateo asked, aiming for helpful. "Dude's chill, right? He won't care about the rustic vibe." My mother snorted. "I'm sure he won't." I stood, smooth and slow, and pushed my chair back. "I'm going to get ready," I said. "I'll see you all at the ceremony." "Wait," my mother called after me. Before you Guar, you sure about the buffet? I mean, a plated dinner is standard. The menu is seasonal and beautiful, I said, so tired of justifying joy that it pressed on my ribs like a weight. We chose it together. She held up her hands. Your day. In the bridal suite, my best friend Aisha waited with an open garment bag and a ready smile. She hugged me without words, then pulled back and looked into my face the way people look at weather, gauging what's coming. You okay? She said. I'm okay, I lied. Then I laughed, soft and breathy. I'm getting married, Aish. We'll keep the noise out, she said, practical as ever. Today is yours. We dressed slowly, me in my dress that wasn't designer but fit like a promise. Aisha in sage green that made her look like she'd grown from the forest itself. I pinned on the simple veil I'd chosen and watched how it softened the lines of my jaw. How it made me look like the version of myself I still wanted to become. When my hair was done, waves pinned low, sprigs of baby's breath tucked in, I stepped back from the mirror and thought, I look like me. Not a magazine, not Valeria's shadow. Me, the photographer, a gentle woman with freckles, knocked and slipped inside. You ready? She whispered, as if the day were sacred and might startle if we spoke too loud. She took some photos by the window, the light pouring over my shoulders, the lace catching the glow. I felt held by that lens, steadied. Then the door opened again, and my mother walked in. For a second she stopped, and something flickered across her face. Some soft ache. Some recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Well, she said, you look lovely. Thank you, I said. And on the heels of gratitude came the stupid hope that she might say more. I brought something, she said, stepping forward. From her bag she drew a string of pearls, familiar and precious. Your grandmother's. My breath caught, Mama. She fastened them at my nape with cool fingers. This is the last. She stopped, lips pressing together, and I didn't know what last meant. Last tradition she could salvage. Last time she'd try to steer me. Last olive branch. Just wear them, she said, and her voice had a burr in it, like sand. Gracias, I whispered. The pearls lay against my skin like a line of little moons. Then Valeria appeared behind her. White blazer, white trousers, glossy hair. She leaned in the doorway and let her eyes sweep over me. Cute, she said. Very cottagecore. Aisha stiffened beside me. It's elegant, she said. Elegance is a matter of context. Valeria replied with a smirk, and I saw Aisha's hands curl into fists. I need to head to the clearing, I said before either of them could escalate. I want to see the aisle before guests arrive. Too late, Valeria said, glancing at her watch. People are early. You know how our family is? Eager for a show. The bird in my chest fluttered again, frantic. Aisha squeezed my arm. Let's go. The path to the clearing curved through pines, the air cool and green around us. Through the trees I could hear voices gathering, the hum of gossip like bees in a hive. The coordinator, Marcy, a brisk woman with a clipboard, met us halfway. Everything's set, she said. We'll start seating in 10. Your string trio is tuning. The florist, she broke off because beyond her shoulder I could see the chairs. 2 long sweeps of wooden chairs arched toward a canopy of boughs over the dock, the lake like a sheet of glass behind it. The aisle was scattered with wildflower petals in colors that made my throat ache. Sunset pinks, cornflower blues, butter yellows. On each chair, a sprig of rosemary tied with twine waited like a promise of memory. It was homey and simple and so beautiful I had to swallow a cry. They'll see, I told myself. They'll see what I see. And then the first wave of family stepped into the clearing and the spell began to crack. Aunt Lucia, draped in sequins that clashed with the forest, looked around and sighed loudly. Oh dear, my allergies. Beside her, Tio Raphael peered at the dock. Is that safe? Looks old. Cousin Mariella clicked her tongue. Where is the champagne welcome? At Valeria's they had servers at the door. Rustic charm, Aunt Lucia said in the tone people use when they mean unfortunate. The murmurs picked up as more arrived. I watched from behind the trees, hidden with Aisha and Marcy, and the voices came like flicks of cold water. Buffet, I hear. A lodge, can you imagine? Her dress is sweet, at least. Who gets married by a lake? Bugs, is there Wi-Fi? I need to post. I wore Louboutins for this. Aisha muttered under her breath, unbelievable. I pressed my palms to my belly, trying to keep the shaking down. The pearls felt heavy suddenly, like a chain. Focus on Daniel, Aisha said. Remember his face when he sees you? I nodded, clinging to that image like driftwood. But humiliation has a way of hunting out the cracks in your armor. It found me in 100 petty ways as the next hour unfolded. The way my mother adjusted a centerpiece, muttering, "We tried," to a cluster of her friends. The way Valeria posed at the edge of the dock in her white drawing eyes like a magnet. The photographer, of course, snapping because the social gravity in our family tilted toward Valeria. The way my father walked up to Marcy and asked if there was any possibility of upgrading to plated service even now, as if money could warp time. Marcy's smile was professional and ironclad. The menu is set as contracted. Mr. Morales, she said. It'll be delicious. He turned away, exasperated, and locked eyes with me where I stood in the shadow of a pine. Alina, he said, beckoning. A word. Aisha squeezed my hand and let go. I crossed to my father, lifting my dress above moss so it wouldn't snag. Up close, I could see the restless tapping of his jaw under skin, the way he wore disapproval like a suit he'd had tailored. This is not optimal, he said. It's our choice, I replied. He stared at the lake, hands on hips. People will talk. They always do. He turned his gaze to me then, something like hurt buried under the hard, dark river of his anger. I wanted more for you, he said quietly. More what? I asked. More applause. More show. More than this. He gestured, a man waving off a fly and accidentally dismissing the sun. I took a breath and let it steady me. I don't need your more, I said. I need my own. He looked at me like I had spoken a language he never learned, then nodded curtly and walked away. As guests continued to arrive, so did their opinions. Two of Valeria's friends, Carla and Nina, who always reminded me of a matching set of expensive Visses, vested past me without noticing. Voices pitched just low enough to pretend they weren't meant to be heard. I guess not everyone can pull off a hotel wedding, Nina said. Not everyone has the budget, Carla replied, and they laughed. A tinkling sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass I wanted to hurl into the lake. The parade of unkindness wore me down in increments, like sand smoothing stone. When my grandmother's pearls caught on the lace at my collarbone, and I had to ask Aisha to free them with trembling fingers. I thought maybe I should have just eloped. The thought slid through me like a thin blade. But then, over the murmur of the crowd, I heard Daniel's laugh carry from somewhere down the path, and it was the safest sound I knew. I straightened my shoulders. The plan hinged on timing. Some guests we'd invited had been asked to keep a low profile until after the ceremony to arrive between vows and reception. I had kept that part of the guest list close. Both because I wanted the surprise intact and because I didn't trust my family not to spin it into a new attack. I'd stored the truth in a room inside me, locked and quiet. Later, I told myself, they can say what they want now, later, but later. Felt very far away when Valeria managed to commandeer the pre-ceremony moment as if she were the host of a gala. She clicked up onto a small stump near the chairs because, of course, there was no stage. She'd have preferred a stage and clapped her hands. Everyone, she trilled. Before we begin, I just want to say how happy we are to be here for my baby sister. She's always been different. She looked at me then with a smile like a knife, and today proves it. The crowd tittered. My face went hot. I saw my mother half smile as if to say she means well, and I wanted to shout, no, she doesn't. Valeria continued, eyes glittering. When I got married, I didn't think Alina would ever want a wedding. She's always been the quiet one, the simple one. But look, she did it. We're proud. She lifted a glass someone had thrust into her hand. Where had that come from? And said to Alina for doing her best. Aisha made a sound like a grenade pin being pulled. I felt blood throb in my ears. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. Sit down, I said, the words threading out of me without my permission. My voice carried in the tree gold light, strange and steady. This isn't your stage. A ripple passed through the crowd's surprise, then the quick flick of gossip warming. Valeria blinked, still smiling, but her eyes hardened. "Of course," she said, hopping down. As she passed me, she leaned in and whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself." Too late, I thought. You've been doing that for me for years. Finally, the music began, the first notes of the trio rising like a blessing. Marcy touched my elbow. "It's time." I took my place at the head of the aisle with Aisha behind me, and for one sharp second, everything else fell away. The lake held the sky like a mirror. The petals unfurled under my shoes. A hush rippled through the chairs, and beyond the murk of hurt, I saw faces softened by the moment's gravity. I breathed Daniel in as if he were already beside me. I stepped forward. As I walked, I kept my eyes on the canopy, on the shape of Daniel emerging at the end of the dock. He stood in a suit that fit him like a truth he'd grown into, tie slightly crooked because he never fussed over perfection. When he saw me, his mouth opened. He didn't smile first. He just looked like he'd been hit by joy, by awe, and I felt my body loosen, some iron band around my ribs dissolving. There, I thought, there you are, and here I am. But even as the moment gathered itself like prayer, small humiliations kept nipping at its edges. A phone rang because someone hadn't silenced it. A child whined because the forest wasn't air-conditioned. From the front row, I heard Aunt Lucia murmur, sweating. I'm sweating as if it were a personal insult. I chose not to look. I chose Daniel. The officiant, our friend Luis, welcomed everyone with warmth. He spoke about seasons and patience, about how love isn't made of grand gestures but daily choices. He spoke about me and Daniel, about how we had known each other in the quiet ways, the late-night lesson plans we helped with at the kitchen table, the groceries carried up 3 flights without being asked, the afternoons we spent in the community garden pulling weeds layer by layer until the shape of care emerged. People shifted in their chairs. Some listened. Some looked at the tops of the trees as if there were something better to watch than to people, committing to walk each other home for the rest of their lives. When it was time for vows, I took Daniel's hands and felt his pulse against my palms. I read the words I had written in a notebook stained with coffee, my voice steadying into a rhythm that felt like my own heartbeat. I promised him honesty, even when my family's noise tried to drown me out. I promised him stubborn joy. I promised him that the life we built would value substance over spectacle, kindness over clout. He listened with eyes bright as water. When it was his turn, he unfolded a small page and said 3 lines in. I wasn't good at believing I deserved this, and I swayed because it struck me like a bell in my center. He promised to keep the front door open for my tired days, to be the hand on my back when I needed to stand tall. He promised to argue like a teammate and to forgive first. From somewhere in the second row, I heard a sigh, my mother's. Maybe. Maybe she had wanted a poem. Maybe she had wanted a brand name. I tightened my fingers around Daniel's and smiled to keep from crying. We exchanged rings. Louise pronounced us married. I kissed Daniel and tasted salt and laughter, the crowd rising to its feet. And in that swell of applause, I realized that embarrassment is loud, but love can be louder if you let it be. We turned toward our guests and walked back up the aisle through a soft rain of petals. Aisha whooped. Mateo actually wiped his eyes, surprised at himself. Even my father clapped, though his face was careful, as if he were still deciding what version of the day he'd tell his friends later. The lake was a coin of light. The air was green and alive. For a few minutes, I let the world slip into that brightness and floated there. Then the reception began, and the slow drip of humiliation returned with a vengeance. The lodge's great room had been transformed, long tables dressed with linen runners. Jars of wildflowers gathered like a field had been poured indoors, candles in softened glass making small stars everywhere. Hand-lettered menus rested on plates, the ink slightly imperfect because my hands had made them. A little sign by the buffet read, "From our kitchen to yours," and explained the local farm the vegetables came from and the woman named Rosa, who, had taught Daniel to make the roasted chicken recipe he loved. I was proud of it. I thought, it's warm. It's real. Charming, Valeria said, arms folded, like a potluck. My stomach dropped. It's catered, I said. Plated later, but buffet for the first pass. People hate lines, she said. People can walk, I said, and felt a flare of anger I didn't swallow this time. It won't kill them. When the first chafing dish lids opened and steam curled up smelling like rosemary and lemon, I exhaled. The food looked beautiful. Heirloom carrots roasted until their edges were caramel sweet. Buttery mashed potatoes hiding a seam of chives. A salad that looked like a meadow. But of course, the commentary continued. Is there lobster? Someone asked. No fillet. This looks homey. I'm gluten-free. Is there anything for me? Then, without waiting for an answer, they should have thought of that. A child poked a serving spoon into the carrots and announced, bunny food. And his mother laughed and said, save room for cake, sweetie. Like everything up to that point was a mistake. By the time we were seated and the clatter of cutlery and small talk filled the room, I was tired down to the marrow. I tried to tune my ears to the compliments because there were some. Daniel's colleagues from school praised the salad. My friend from the community garden asked for the dressing recipe. Aisha's boyfriend moaned happily over the chicken. But the other notes pushed through like static. Halfway through, my mother leaned across the table and said, you should have done a tasting with me. I could have helped. I didn't want your help, I said, and even as I said it, I knew it would land like a slap. She sat back, blinking. Well, that's clear. My father cleared his throat, lifted his glass as if about to toast, then thought better of it and took a long drink instead. Speeches began. Louise toasted us with tenderness. Aisha spoke next, her voice fierce and warm, saying, Alina is the friend who shows up with soup and sits on your floor when your world breaks. She chose a man who knows how to hold that kind of love. Tears prickled my eyes, and for a moment, the room quieted. Then Valeria stood, uninvited but inevitable, glass in hand again. My shoulders tensed. To Alina, she said, flashing a smile bright enough to hide the sharp. We're all so proud of you for finally stepping out of your comfort zone. She paused for polite laughter. You were always so modest. She gestured around. This is so you. I stared at her, willing her to stop. But truly, she continued, what matters is love. I mean, my wedding was, she caught herself, laughed. Never mind. What I'm saying is, today isn't about spectacle. It's about heart. And you have so much heart. She tapped her chest with manicured fingers, then did that thing where she pretended to cry and fanned her eyes. I'm sorry, I get emotional. To Alina and Daniel, applause. A few people clinked their forks against their glasses to prompt a kiss. Valeria sat, satisfied, and my humiliation curdled into something else, something with teeth. I squeezed Daniel's knee under the table. He turned to me, brow furrowing, reading my face like a tide chart. Hey, he whispered. We're almost there. Almost where? I said, my throat tight. To the part where it stops being about them. I looked at him and felt the small locked room inside me hum. The guest list. The names hidden under the fold. The ones my family would recognize when they arrived. It's the ones they didn't deserve but would learn to respect. The thought steadied me like a hand at my back. Soon I told myself, hold the line. And then because the day couldn't resist one more blow, I caught my mother discreetly rearranging the seating place cards at the head table, shifting people around as if I couldn't be trusted with my own table map. What are you doing? I said, rising. Just making it more appropriate, she said. We put Tia Ophelia next to Uncle Leo. They don't get along and we shouldn't have Daniel's coworker so near the family. It's my seating plan, I said, hearing my voice sharpen. Put them back, Alina, she said in a tone that meant I was the child who didn't understand how the world works. Put them back. She stared at me, then smiled with that brittle veneer that had driven me mad since I was 14. She put them back as if she were humoring a toddler. Heads turned. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I sat down and stabbed a carrot that had done nothing wrong. Breathe, Daniel murmured. 2 more songs. Then, arrivals. My heart stuttered. Hope flared. I pictured the path beyond the pines. Cars. The hush that would rise when certain people stepped through the doorway. The faces on my family when they realized who had said yes to us not because of status but because of the life we've built quietly when no. One was applauding. I pictured Aunt Lucia's mouth falling open, my father's eyebrows lifting, Valeria's mask slipping. Music swelled. Guests drifted between tables and the porch where sunset had begun to lay gold over the lake. Kids ran in circles. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of talk. The three-piece musicians shifted from Vivaldi to a soft folk tune that made the room feel like a long-held sigh. Then Marcy slipped to our table, eyes bright like we were conspirators. "They're here," she said softly. I set down my fork. Daniel stood and offered his hand. It shook a little. I loved him more for it. Together, toward the doorway that framed the twilight, the murmur of the room stretching thin behind us like pulled sugar. In the entry, shadows gathered. Silhouettes. A pause like a held breath before a note. Aisha appeared at my shoulder, grinning like she could barely keep the secret in her teeth. "Ready?" she said. I swallowed. "Eddie." Behind me, I heard my mother's voice unspooling, bright and brittle. "Who is it?" "More of Daniel's students. We should seat them in the back," and then the first figure stepped into the light and conversations broke in the middle of sentences. Forks stopped midair. A murmur rose that wasn't gossip anymore. Was awe the beginning of a pivot I had dreamed of but didn't fully believe I would witness? I glanced at Daniel, then at my family. Their faces were masks in the moment before, shattering. I felt the tremble in the floorboards as the room shifted around us, power tilting. Perception realigning like iron filings drawn to a hidden magnet. Their mockery fell quiet, quick as a candle snuffed by fingers. I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and turned to greet our guests. The doorway to the lodge framed the fading daylight like a stage curtain being drawn back. For one trembling moment, all of us were suspended between breaths. The clinking of silverware halted. Gossip froze in throats. Even the string trio faltered mid-note as the bow scraped a hesitant chord. And then the first of the arrivals stepped in. It was Professor Adrian Calderon, Daniel's mentor, and now a nationally recognized education reform advocate. His gray hair gleamed under the lodge lights, his presence commanding yet warm. He was followed by his wife, elegant in navy silk. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Is that?" someone whispered. "It can't be." "I saw him on the news just last week." Behind him came Rosa Martinez, a celebrated chef whose restaurant had just earned a Michelin star. She swept in with laughter, kissed me on both cheeks, and handed me a bouquet she'd brought from her own rooftop garden. My mother blinked so fast I thought her lashes might ignite. And they kept coming. Dr. Stephen Patel, head of the hospital, where Daniel had volunteered during the pandemic, walked in with his wife and young daughter. He had treated Mateo once after a soccer injury. But my brother hadn't recognized him at first until now when his jaw dropped. Then came Evelyn Hart, the philanthropist whose foundation had funded scholarships for underprivileged students, one of whom had been Daniel. She clasped his hands and said, "You look radiant, Daniel. You both do? I wouldn't miss this day for anything." Every arrival sent another ripple through the room. And when Councilwoman Rivera stepped inside, yes, the very one my father always tried to impress at fundraisers, my parents' faces froze as though the air had turned to ice around them. I felt my spine straighten, a warmth flooding through me like sunrise. It wasn't just a guest list, it was a revelation. Daniel and I had invited the people who mattered in ways my family never understood, people who had shaped our lives, who valued service, kindness, resilience. Some were well known, yes, but they weren't there for prestige. They were there because of us. The contrast was sharp. My family had mocked rustic charm and buffet dinners. But when they saw who walked through those wooden doors, their hierarchy cracked. Suddenly, it wasn't the lodge that looked small-lit, was their pettiness. The reactions Valeria's face was a mask, her perfect smile faltering at the edges. She leaned toward her husband, whispering something frantic, but her eyes never left Rosa, who was chatting animatedly with Aisha about the menu. My mother clutched her pearls ironically, the very pearls she had placed around my neck that morning. She looked from Professor Calderon to Councilwoman Rivera to Evelyn Hart, her expression caught between confusion and calculation. I could practically hear her thoughts. How did Alina manage this? Why weren't we told? What will people think of us now? My father tried to recover with dignity, rising to greet the councilwoman with a handshake. But she bypassed him, smiling directly at Daniel. "You made such a difference in our district's literacy program," she said. "You have no idea how many families speak of you with gratitude." My father froze, his hand hovering awkwardly mid-air before he let it fall. The look on his face, shock, pride tangled with envy. And something like shame was worth more to me than all the chandeliers in the Ritz-Carlton. Mateo leaned toward me, wide-eyed. "Alina, what the hell? You didn't tell me this was happening." I smiled. "Not everything needs to be told, Mateo." Whispers turning as the arrivals continued. The tone in the room shifted. Where earlier I had heard mockery, buffet, bugs, potluck, now the whispers had a different edge. "She knows. Rosa Martinez. That's Councilwoman Rivera right there. How on earth did they pull this off?" People craned their necks to see, adjusted their postures, suddenly aware of their own smallness in the presence of those who had come to celebrate me and Daniel. Even the trio of musicians seemed to sense it. Their tentative playing blossomed into a stronger, richer sound, as though the energy of the room had been rewired. The moment of revelation, when all were seated, Daniel stood, clearing his throat. The chatter quieted instantly, like the hush before an orchestra's first note. "We want to thank you all for being here," he said, his voice carrying steady. "Many of you know us personally, but some may not know the full story of why you were chosen to join us tonight. Alina and I didn't want our wedding to be about spectacle or competition. We wanted it to be about gratitude. Every guest here represents a thread in the fabric of our lives. People who taught us, guided us, believed in us, or simply showed up when no one else did." I placed my hand over his, and he smiled at me before continuing. "This list isn't long because we wanted it. Exclusive, it's long because our blessings are. Each of you has helped shape who we are, and we want you to know how deeply we honor that." The room was silent. The words were not grand, but they were true. I looked out across the tables and saw faces softening, pride glowing, some eyes glistening. And in the corner, I caught Valeria's jaw tighten as though she were grinding her perfect teeth. A flashback. The planning. I remembered the nights Daniel and I had sat cross-legged on the floor of our tiny apartment. Index cards spread out like puzzle pieces, writing names. "It's not who they expect," he had said. "Who mattered?" I had replied. We'd chosen mentors, friends, students, neighbors. People who had fed us when times were lean. People who had written recommendation letters. People who had seen us not as a disappointment or a burden, but as enough. We hadn't flaunted it because we didn't need to. The surprise tonight wasn't about showing off fit, was about shifting the lens. For once, my family would see me not as the simple one, but as someone whose life carried weight they couldn't measure. Valeria's attempt, of course. Valeria couldn't sit quietly. She raised her glass again, forcing brightness. "Well, what a surprise. Alina, you never mentioned. Such illustrious guests. We're all honored." Her tone dripped with false sweetness, but I could see the storm in her eyes. She was scrambling, trying to reclaim her usual position as the star. "Thank you, Valeria," I said, my voice calm. "But they're not here because they're illustrious. They're here because they're family, the kind of family we chose." A murmur swept the room again, sharper this time, people exchanging looks. The jab was subtle, but it landed. Valeria's smile flickered, then froze like porcelain about to crack. The turning point dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Instead of sniffing at the buffet, guests now asked Rosa about the recipe, delighted when she explained she had helped design it with Daniel. Instead of mocking the lodge, people admired the beams in the view, especially after the councilwoman praised the venue as refreshingly genuine. My mother sat stiff, her fork hovering, clearly torn between anger and the desperate urge to claim credit. At one point, she leaned to Aunt Lucia and whispered, "Of course, we always encouraged Elena's friendships." I almost laughed out loud. Encouraged, no ignored, dismissed, belittled. And now, here she was, trying to stitch herself into the fabric she had tried to unravel for years. My reflection in that moment, as I watched the room transform, I felt something inside me settle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for approval. I wasn't defending myself against their barbs. I wasn't shrinking. Instead, I stood taller because the truth was visible to everyone. My life, our life, was not small, it was not cheap. It was rich with people who mattered, people my family couldn't buy or control. I caught my reflection in the window, pearls glowing against my throat, and thought, I am enough. I always was. The final arrival, just when the night seemed to have reached its peak. The doors opened one last time. Silence fell again as a man stepped in, a man almost everyone in the room recognized. Dean Richard Owens, head of the prestigious university Daniel and I had both attended. The very man my parents had once begged for a letter of recommendation for Valeria. The man they had admired from afar but never dared approach. He crossed the room and went straight to me. "Alina," he said warmly, "it's been too long. Your senior thesis was one of the finest I've read in my career. And now I hear you're publishing." Gasps. Actual gasps from my relatives. My thesis had been dismissed by my family as a hobby, not worth pursuing. Yet here was the dean himself, praising me in front of them all. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Dean Owens. That means everything." "Not at all," he said. "The world needs more voices like yours. Congratulations, my dear." When he moved on to greet Daniel, I turned and met my mother's stunned gaze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For once in her life, she had nothing to say. The revelation, it wasn't about the venue. It had never been about the venue. It was about who we had become despite the years of being overlooked. It was about choosing love over show, substance over status, gratitude over gossip. And in that moment, the entire room realized it too. The humiliation I had suffered earlier, the snickers, the whispers. The comparisons transformed into their own humiliation, because they had mocked what they did not understand. And now they sat exposed in their pettiness while the truth glowed all around them. The twist was not just the guest list. The twist was me. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was the woman who had built a life so rich that the very people my family worshipped socially now came to honor me. And nothing nut could take that away. The room no longer belonged to my family's mockery. It belonged to me. As Dean Owens drifted further inside, shaking hands and exchanging words with Daniel, the glow of recognition and reverence lingered. My mother's painted smile twitched. My father's jaw tightened. And Valeria's glass remained frozen midair as if she'd forgotten how to sip. I had endured their scoffs, their comparisons, their belittling. But now, with every passing second, the truth settled over the gathering like an invisible crown. For once, the Morales family hierarchy had cracked. And Alina, the simple one, the quiet one, the daughter who never measured up, was standing taller than them all. The toast Daniel touched my arm and leaned close. "It's time," he whispered, and I knew what he meant. We had planned a toast to our moment to speak not just to friends, but to family. To deliver what we had held back for years. He rose first, clinking his glass. Conversations died instantly, the hush so complete I could hear the flicker of the candles. "Thank you, everyone," Daniel began. His voice was calm, but I heard the iron underneath it. "You've honored us tonight not just with your presence, but with your support, encouragement, and the love you've shown us over the years. Alina and I are grateful beyond words." He glanced at me then, his smile soft but steady. "But there's someone else who needs to speak." He sat and all eyes turned to me. I rose, glass in hand, my pulse drumming like a battle cry in my ears. I had rehearsed words in my mind, but now that I was standing, the silence stretched and my heart poured them out raw, unscripted. When Daniel and I first announced our wedding, I began. Not everyone was supportive. A ripple, sharp and guilty, moved across the tables. My mother's lips pressed into a line. Some questioned our choices. The venue, the menu, the music, the style. Some said it wasn't good enough, that I wasn't good enough. I paused, letting the words hang heavy. But what you see tonight, the people who sit among you, is the proof that love and kindness matter more than chandeliers or champagne fountains. Every guest here represents a piece of our journey, and that journey is more beautiful than any ballroom could ever be. I lifted my glass, locking eyes with my mother first, then Valeria, then my father. To love, to gratitude, and to choosing what truly matters even when others don't understand. The room erupted in applause. Guests stood, glasses raised high. And for the first time in my life, the clapping wasn't polite, obligatory noise. It was real. It was for me. The exposure, but it wasn't enough just to bask in the applause. I wanted them, my family, to feel what I had felt all my life. So I turned, smile warm, but words deliberate. I especially want to thank those who doubted me, because without your doubts, I might never have learned how strong I am. A low gasp, a hush. Valeria shifted in her chair, eyes narrowing. My father cleared his throat, but I continued. I learned to stop seeking approval where it would never come. I learned to define success for myself. And tonight, I think we can all see that what some call simple or cheap can actually be extraordinary. I sat down to a wave of cheers. Daniel kissed my cheek, pride burning in his eyes. My mother stared at her plate, her fork untouched. My father sipped his wine too quickly, his ears red. And Valerio's smile cracked completely, revealing the bitterness beneath. Valeria strikes back. She couldn't help herself. She stood abruptly, clinking her glass harder than necessary. Such inspiring words, she said, her tone laced with venomous sweetness. But let's not pretend, Alina, that you planned all this alone. You've always needed help, haven't you? Always been the dependent one. Her words sliced the air, but instead of silence, a ripple of disapproval rolled through the room. I saw Evelyn Hart frown. Councilwoman Rivera raise an eyebrow, rose across her arms. I stood again, my voice steady. You're right, Valeria. I did need help. From people who believed in me. From people who saw me as worthy, even when my own family didn't. And I'm not ashamed of that. Because true strength isn't pretending you don't need anyone, it's knowing who to lean on. Applause thundered again. Valeria's face blanched, her attempt at control slipping like sand through fingers. The public humiliation, it was then that Rosa, the chef, rose to her feet. I have something to say, she declared. The room quieted instantly. I've cooked for presidents, celebrities, and millionaires. But when Daniel asked me to be part of this wedding, I said yes immediately. Do you know why? Because Alina treated me like a human being when I was just Rosa, the woman selling tamales on the street corner. She remembered me when no one else did. Gasps. My mother's hand flew to her chest, and seeing people here tonight look down on her choices. Rosa's voice cut like fire. It makes me angry, because this woman has more heart than half the glittering parties I've cooked for combined. She raised her glass high. To Alina, may you never dim yourself for anyone. The room roared, guests chanting my name. My cheeks burned, but not with shame, with vindication. My mother looked like she might faint. My father muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. And Valeria. Her face was a portrait of defeat. Every eye turned away from her and toward me. The father's reckoning later as dinner wound down and guests drifted toward dessert. My father pulled me aside near the veranda overlooking the lake. His face was tight, but his voice was lower than I'd expected. Alina, he said, I misjudged you. I blinked. My father apologizing. I wanted more, he said haltingly. For you. But maybe I confused more with different. You've built something. Real. I see that now. For a moment, the girl in me wanted to cry, to throw my arms around him and soak up the approval I'd craved for years. But I was no longer that girl. I was a woman who had earned her own validation. Thank you, I said simply. But I don't need you to see it for it to be true. He flinched, then nodded slowly. It was not triumph I felt, but liberation. The final blow to Valeria as the cake was brought out, a simple three-tiered creation adorned with wildflowers. Baked by Aisha's cousin Valeria made one last attempt to reclaim the spotlight. She strutted forward, white suit gleaming, and announced, "Let's cut the cake the traditional way, shall we?" With the siblings by the bride's side. She reached for the knife as though it belonged to her. But before I could respond, Councilwoman Rivera stood. "Actually," she said firmly, "this is their moment. Alina and Daniel's. No one else's." A hush. Valeria froze, hands still hovering near the knife. Then, with every eye watching, she withdrew, her cheeks burning crimson. Daniel took my hand, placed it on the knife, and together we cut the cake while the room erupted in cheers. Valeria slipped back into her seat, invisible for once in her life. Justice delivered. The justice was not in shouting. It wasn't in throwing their insults back at them. It was in standing, glowing, while the truth unfolded for everyone to see. They had mocked the venue. They had mocked me. But in the end, the very people they revered, leaders, scholars, philanthropists, had chosen to honor me. And my family's power over me, built on years of criticism and belittling, crumbled in front of everyone. My inner triumph as the night wound down, music playing soft and sweet. I stood with Daniel at the edge of the dock, stars beginning to prick the sky. Behind us, laughter and music carried through the lodge, our guests celebrating with genuine joy. Daniel kissed my temple. "You did it," he whispered. "No," I said, smiling. "We did it." And in my chest, where that caged bird had once battered its wings, there was only quiet, now peaceful, powerful quiet. The justice was complete. The stars hung low over the lake, shimmering like scattered diamonds on black silk. The music inside the lodge carried softly through the open doors, laughter, clinking glasses, the murmur of conversations that no longer carried barbs but warmth. The night air smelled of pine and roasted sugar from the cake. And for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, profoundly free. Daniel and I stood at the edge of the dock, my dress brushing the wood, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. We didn't need words in that moment. The silence was enough, the kind of silence you only hear after a storm, when the world holds still to let you breathe. Reflection. As I looked back at the glow of the lodge, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The countless times I had swallowed, hurt, the years of being the overlooked daughter. The shadow behind Valeria's golden light. The dinners where my accomplishments were dismissed, the birthdays forgotten, the small victories ignored. I remembered lying awake at night as a teenager, whispering into the dark, "What's wrong with me? Why can't they love me the way they love her?" But tonight I had my answer. There was never anything wrong with me. What was wrong was the way they measured worth by status, wealth, appearances. I had spent years trying to fit into a mold they'd carved for me, but I was never meant to. My life was meant to be crafted in my own shape, my own colors. And standing there, pearls against my throat and Daniel's hand steady at my waist, I knew that I had finally claimed it. My mother's quiet approach at some point. My mother stepped onto the dock, her heels careful against the boards. She hesitated, her silhouette sharp against the lodge lights. For once, she didn't stride forward like a queen. She lingered, unsure, almost timid. "Alina," she said softly. I turned, meeting her eyes. There was no fire in them tonight. Only something tired, something fractured. "You surprised me," she admitted. Her voice cracked like thin ice. "I thought this lodge, this simplicity, was beneath us. But the people here tonight, the way they spoke of you, it seems I never really knew my daughter." A lump rose in my throat, but I didn't let it soften me entirely. "You never tried to," I said, not cruelly, but plainly. She flinched. I wanted you to have the best." "No, Mama," I said, my voice steady. "You wanted me to have what you thought was best. But I already had what was best for me." I looked at Daniel, at the lodge, at the laughter floating across the water. "And it's right here." She swallowed hard, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without her armor. Just a woman, flawed and unsure, realizing too late what she had missed. "I don't expect forgiveness tonight," she whispered. "But I am proud, truly." I nodded slowly. It wasn't the grand apology I might have dreamed of once, but it was something. A crack in the wall she had built. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. Valeria's silence later. I caught Valeria sitting alone near the desert table, her untouched slice of cake before her. The light no longer followed her. The conversations didn't orbit her like planets around the sun. For once, she was a background figure, and she looked lost. I walked over, not to gloat, but to release the final weight. "Valeria," I said gently. She looked up, her smile brittle. "Congratulations." "Thank you." I paused. "You don't have to compete with me. You never did. I wasn't playing your game." Her eyes flickered with something in V, shame, maybe even relief. But she said nothing. She just nodded. And for the first time in our lives, we sat together in silence, equals. My father's gesture when the night drew to its close, my father approached. He didn't speak. Instead, he pressed an envelope into my hand. Confused, I opened it later in our cabin to find a letter, not long, not eloquent, but scrawled in his familiar. "Sharp handwriting, Alina, I don't always understand you. But I see now that you are stronger than I ever realized. Maybe stronger than me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "Papa," I wept quietly, not because the letter fixed everything, but because it acknowledged what I had needed to hear all my life, that I mattered. The guests' departure as guests left that night, I hugged each one, gratitude overflowing. Rosa promised to send her roasted chicken recipe. Evelyn Hart said she wanted me to consider applying for a grant to expand my writing. Dean Owens clasped my shoulder and told me to keep going, keep publishing, because the world needed more voices like mine. Even Councilwoman Rivera pulled me aside, smiling. "Never let anyone tell you your story is small, Alina. Tonight proved it's bigger than theirs will ever be." Their words wrapped around me like a cloak of validation I hadn't known I'd been craving. And unlike my family's fleeting approval, this validation wasn't conditional. It was rooted in truth. The closing dance before the night ended, Daniel led me onto the dock once more for one final dance. The trio played a soft, lilting melody, and fairy lights strung along the beams glowed like fireflies. Guests gathered around, clapping gently, watching as we moved together under the stars. As Daniel twirled me, laughter spilling from both of us, I caught sight of my family standing at the edge of the crowd. Their expressions were complicated pride tangled with regret, admiration twisted with shame. And for once, I didn't need to unravel their feelings, because I finally knew mine. Lessons learned later, lying in bed beside Daniel. The lodge quiet around us. I thought about everything I wanted to carry forward from this day. That love is stronger than mockery. That choosing yourself is not selfish shit, is survival. That validation from others, even family, pales in comparison to the power of believing in yourself. And that justice doesn't always come from revenge, often comes from living fully. Authentically, until the truth is undeniable. For years I had been made to feel small. But the irony was, the smaller they tried to make me, the more room I had to grow in directions they couldn't see. And tonight, I had grown so far, so wide, that they could no longer deny me. Closure the next morning as the mist lifted off the lake once more. I stood outside with coffee in hand and let the quiet wash over me. Birds darted across the water, their wings catching the early light. Daniel wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and kissed my hair. "We did it," he murmured. "Yes," I said softly. "We did." I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who sat at the dinner table, desperate for a kind word, shrinking under the weight of comparison. I wanted to tell her, hold on. One day, you will stand tall. One day, they will see. But more importantly, one day, you won't need them to see it all. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of pine and coffee, and let the peace settle deep in my bones. The wedding was over, but the life Daniel and I would build together, rich with love and authenticity, was just beginning. And I knew without doubt that no amount of mockery, no whispers of not good enough would ever break me again. Because I had already won. And that was my story. Mocked, humiliated, underestimated, but in the end, justice found its way, and the truth couldn't be hidden any longer. If this story touched you, if you felt the pain and the satisfaction of the ending, don't forget to like this video so more people can experience it too. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated by your own family, only to rise stronger in the end? I'd love to hear your stories. And if you don't want to miss the next tale of betrayal, revenge, and justice served cold, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because trust me, there are many more stories to come, and you won't want to miss a single one.